the shadow is not your enemy. We live in a culture that is obsessed with light and goodness, which is valuable in its own way. But when you're on that journey and you're spiritually seeking, it is very challenging if you go into groups of people that only want to just exist in the light and all things that are good and feel good and holy, because there is not the depth to hold you when you're going through some of the darker periods. And so for me, like, my soapbox message is that the shadow is also where the medicine is that you're seeking. Like, you cannot surrender what you have not identified and acknowledged.
Welcome to How to Trust Yourself, the podcast for anyone who's done with the endless second guessing and ready to tune in to your inner guidance. I'm Anna Holtzman, and I get that feeling of trudging through life like you're wading through mud, trying to figure out which way to go. In my 20s, I spent more time asking what should I do with my life than writing about crushes or bad dates in my journal. I've tried on a lot of answers: architecture, publishing, editing reality TV for a decade, and finally landing on therapy and coaching, helping people like you connect with your purpose. But here's the thing I've learned through all those twists and turns. Trusting yourself is the key to moving forward, even when the path feels messy. So if you're ready to stop doubting yourself and start listening to your gut, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Welcome back, dear listener. Today's conversation is about what happens when we stop trying to outrun the parts of our story we wish were different and begin to understand that those very shadows may hold some of the material for our healing. My guest today is Cassidy Gard, a 3-time Emmy Award-winning television producer, former Good Morning America correspondent, and author of the memoir, Cosmic Goodness: Surrendering the Shadows to Live in the Light. Her work explores spirituality, motherhood, sobriety, grief, and reinvention. Cassidy spent years telling other people's stories, covering everything from breaking news and mass shootings to the Me Too movement, while privately carrying her own history of childhood trauma, her father's alcoholism, grief, anxiety, and the enormous amount of energy it took to keep parts of herself hidden. In this conversation, we talk about what it means to be highly visible and still be hiding in plain sight, how journaling became a lifeline for Cassidy from the time she was 7 years old, the strange little breadcrumbs and cosmic winks that can guide us through periods of reinvention, and what changed when she finally turned the storyteller's lens toward her own life. We also talk about the courage it takes to claim your lived experience as yours to tell, the difference between chasing the light and actually making room for the shadow, and why healing doesn't necessarily mean becoming easy breezy or endlessly positive. I especially loved Cassidy's reminder that the shadow is not the enemy, that we can't surrender what we haven't first been willing to see. If you've ever felt caught between the person you learned to be and the person you're becoming, or wondered whether your own messy, complicated story is worthy of being told, I think you'll find a lot to hold on to in this conversation. Cassidy, welcome. It's such a pleasure to meet you. We got to chat for like a minute before hitting record, and I'm already really excited to have this conversation and see where things go. So welcome, and thanks for being here.
Thank you, Anna. It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So I've been reading up on you because this is the first time that you and I are meeting. So I've been learning a little bit about you by reading about you. And I know that you have done a lot of different things. You've had a lot of different roles in life. You are a writer, a producer, a mother, a seeker in life, so many things. Can you share a little bit with us about who you are, whatever version of that you want to share, and what feels most important to you in life at this moment?
Yeah. Well, every aspect of my interest always stem from storytelling. I love narratives, how different storylines can intersect and diverge and end up back together again. I am somebody who's always drawn to the intersection of how people connect, like why certain people land on certain streets in front of certain people. And it feels like a small world, but then in reality, it's a giant universe. So my interest always led me to seeking that, which led me into producing and storytelling as an entertainment journalist, which eventually transformed into hard hitting news at Good Morning America and ABC News. And that was a big bulk of my 20s. And I write a lot about that ambition. I recently saw a quote on your Instagram about masking
Yeah.
and the energy that that takes. And in reality, when you read my book, you'll see that all of the childhood trauma and shame that I write about took a lot of masking to hide those parts. But the beautiful part about motherhood is you really don't have any energy left over at the end of the day to pretend to be anyone but who you actually are. So my essays explore the grief and liberty of that in a really big way. So it's an arc, childhood to teen years, 20s. Now I'm 36. I'm on the other side of a lot of my dad dying. These
Yeah.
monumental moments that we all go through at any point. The intersection of what grief looks like for me was really different because of my dad's disease of alcoholism. So there's parts people will relate to, and then there's other parts they might not. And I think the beauty of it is I hope anyone would read it and walk away just feeling a recognition for other realities that people might go through.
Yeah. And just to orient our listeners, I know that you're talking about your memoir that you just come out with. It will be published by the time
Mm-hmm.
this episode airs. At the time of our talking, it's in the
Mm-hmm.
pre-published phase, but it's called Cosmic Goodness: Surrendering the Shadows to Live in the Light. And we're going to get deeply into the book, but I love that you talked about masking. And I think this is something that a lot of people don't understand or misunderstand, this idea that you could be highly visible in your life. You're in this public career appearing on television. So being seen, right? But you could also be like hiding in plain sight and
Mm-hmm.
using a lot of effort, whether consciously or unconsciously, to do that.
Absolutely. And that's a lot of what the essays will explore is identifying what it means when you do put that mask down. And I do
Yeah.
have a lot of grace for my 22-year-old self because I did the best I could with the tools I had at the time. And so having shame now for how much I was trying to pretend to be something I wasn't isn't like a color in the book I want to illustrate because I also just want to give my 22-year-old self like a really big hug because I know how much I was struggling with depression and anxiety and kind of the beauty of entering a new era when you do get older is a lot of that melts away. And for me, it just like the journey of the pandemic and finding cosmic goodness, which ultimately was the property I purchased in Montana,
Yeah.
did lead me to putting the mask down. And that's honestly where my story changes from victim to victory in a big way.
Yeah. I know that you've been writing for a lifetime, long before writing this book, and I'm curious eh, what in your life drew you to writing in general, and then what more specifically drew you to writing this very personal memoir?
Yeah, well, the truth is, as a child, I had a lot of anger at both my father for his alcoholism, but a lot of anger at my mom for not really recognizing the extent of his disease. I was continually put in situations where I was being driven drunk, or my dad would have emotional outbursts, and my mom let him have me on the weekends. So nobody was around to be a witness. And when I was so young, even at 4, 5, and 6, like I didn't have the vocabulary to explain what was happening because I didn't really understand it. So I had this like second wave of anger at my mom, honestly, for as an adult being like, why did you drop me off there? Like he was in active addiction. And, in reality, my mom was just an exhausted single mom and truly needed that break to herself. She was working full time as a teacher. And so I don't think she had the bandwidth to pause and really ask what was going on. And so the writing, I have journals starting from the first grade. I started my first journal when I was 7 years old. And I have at least somewhere between 45 and 50 in storage now in Montana.
Wow.
And getting to be 36 and read back on my own inner world of like 7, 8, 9, the writing was really a salvation for me, even that young. Like I had such a release to write, like, I'm so angry at my dad. He yelled at me today. Like it's a time capsule. And those journals are probably my most cherished and sacred possession.
That's amazing. I really like, there's a piece of this that I really related to when you talked about having all those journals in storage. And I'm looking behind me right now. I can see this giant cardboard box that I have in my office. And the corner of it is all torn apart because the cats use it as a scratcher, apparently. But it's filled with journals that, in my case, started at, I think, 19 when I was in college.
Wow. But
Yeah.
still, what a formative age. That coming of
Oh,
age
yeah.
time is so special. And
Yeah.
also, I didn't even recognize like immediately, my first son was born on June 7th, 2023. And I always knew like my anniversary of moving to New York City was early June. But when I found the passage that said like June 7th, 2007, I'm here, I've made it to New York City and I'm never leaving, I was like, oh my God, that was my first wave of rebirth, leaving Florida to go to New York City. And then June 7th, all those years later, I had a second wave of rebirth. Well, we have a lot of waves, but those two were really big. But
Yes.
along the way, I think the reinvention of our lives calls for many rebirths. But I'm just so happy I got to recognize that June 7th carried such a monumental day for me.
It's so wild to like have the documents because, I mean, not a lot of people have that necessarily, like whether they don't keep a journal or they, tore it up and or burned it or whatever. But to be able to go back and see like our own patterns and the little like breadcrumbs that we leave for ourselves, things that we didn't even remember we were thinking about 10 years ago and 20 years ago.
Yeah. In my book, I call it cosmic winks from the universe. So the breadcrumbs, all of it carries the same, they're just like little signals, clues, and they ultimately lead to these journeys that like we couldn't even have predicted, past our wildest imagination.
I'm curious, what do you like? Because we probably all interpret that in our own unique way. Like, what's your framework for understanding what that is? Like, is there some kind of force within us, like some predetermined path, or is it something else to you?
It was really special because I've always loved the Joseph Campbell quote, follow your bliss. And the basic idea is, doors will open where there only were walls, and you'll find yourself in rooms where people like are, essentially there to greet you and welcome you and are like excited for your presence. I've thought a lot about, is it predestined? And, I have really visceral deja vu sometimes.
Yeah.
And I've read that deja vu is some signal from a past life or future life or some clue that you are exactly where you're meant to be. But like I've had moments where my son is in the high chair and I'm reaching to get an orange and I'm about to peel it and I'm like I just have lived this. And so I
Yeah.
don't know about the idea if it's like predestined, but I do know I have very intense thoughts in my subconscious mind in the middle of the night, like this early dawn period. Sometimes these just ideas come out of nowhere. I'm like half awake, half asleep, dream state, and I just get an idea. And some of the most like magnificent things that have happened in my life stemmed from that. My son's name is Golden, and when I was
Ooh.
pregnant, it was like 4 a.m. and it just golden. It came to me like an angel, as cheesy as it is, like an angel just like
Yeah.
said it in my ear. And I woke up and I was like, his name's Golden. And my partner was like, I love it. I love it. And he's like, how'd you get it? I was like, in the middle of the night, I just like dream stated. It just
Yeah.
downloaded. And so do you ever get that like subconscious thought in the middle of the night?
Totally.
Isn't that
Yes,
wild?
and also this kind of leads into another question that I was dying to ask as soon as you were talking about the like your history of journaling for so many different
Mhm.
years. Because I've journaled for many years too, something that I experienced, and I'm curious if you've experienced some version of this or not, is that my way of journaling or my relationship to it shifted over the years where when I started as a teenager, it was kind of just like an exposition. Yes, I was talking about my feelings, not just things that
Mhm.
happened, but it was like an exposition of my feelings. It's like I feel this,
Mhm.
this, and this, and then it was just kind of like vomited onto the page, which was helpful. But
Mhm.
then in much more recent times, I'm 49 now, so in my early 40s, I um had developed chronic migraine, and I started using journaling as a way to
Oh,
recover from
I
it.
get migraines. Oh.
Oh, well, we can talk about that some
Oh.
other time, but I started using journaling as part of my recovery from the chronic migraines, and I
Oh.
found my way into this whole different way of journaling where I would describe it as kind of like dialoguing with that part of myself that like drops that drops those glimmers is like a
Wow.
dialogue with myself.
That's beautiful. I love that.
It's a totally life-changing experience. I'm curious for you if you found that the way you write and when you're journaling, has it kind of stayed consistent over the years? Has it morphed? I mean, we all have our own different relationships to this.
Yeah, I love scripting, like future scripting, where you just
Yeah.
write as if the dream scenario has already happened. That
Yeah.
was very powerful for me when I was single and very much wanting to become a mother and searching for my partner. I would just script as if it had already happened. And when I read back on those now, it's really wild, just like how tapped into exactly what my vision for how my life would look. And I was still working this like really high pressure job, but
Mm.
my scripting never included, wake up, leave by 6:30 a.m. to get to the newsroom. Like that was not my dream world for being a mom. Like I wanted to have space and time within my day to spend exorbitant amounts of time with my children. And I saw what those high pressure jobs demanded of mothers and,
Yeah.
them getting to the office at 7 a.m. for a newsroom meeting at 7:30 and then in the office till 6. And I watched them and I was like, oh, I could tell that a lot of them carried a lot of grief over how much they were missing. But,
Yeah.
you know, and a lot of them since actually have left. So That's the truth, though. I mean, I think some women's like dream world, like that is the most fulfilling. And I think that that's
Yeah.
beautiful if that's what lights them up. But my journaling and scripting really helped me carve if this is the life I want, like what changes am I going to have to make to set up my life for that? Because it's not going to get from point A to point Z without
Yeah.
something's got to shift and give. And journaling actually really did illuminate that for me in a huge way, in a giant
Yeah.
way, actually.
And that makes a
It's a miracle.
ton of sense to me. I'm just thinking about
Yeah.
like just earlier this morning, I was literally having a conversation with myself. Sometimes I do that instead of
I
journaling
do that all the time.
in the shower. And it was like, it illuminated this like whole thing. It was like, I didn't even know I was thinking about this. Um,
Little clues.
yeah. So I'd love to hear more about what was it that led you to writing this book and what role did the book play in this? Like, clearly you've made a massive life transformation from that
Mhm.
time when you were getting getting to work at 6 in the morning and that whole high pressure thing.
Yeah, well, for me, I truthfully, like the intro of the book, the prologue begins. I'm 27 years old. My dad had just died like weeks before.
Yeah.
And a handful of months before that, my relationship of 4 years ended. And during my 20s, taking care of my father came from we were estranged. We had not spoken in years. I had told the family, I don't want to hear any updates. Like he had lived a very chaotic life. Like every 4 or 5 months, there was another crazy, chaotic thing you never believe would have happened. And I was just exhausted. I'm like, I am, at that point, like 24, 25. And I truly was like, the shadow of my father is causing so much dysfunction and anger in my life. And I was very actively going to Marianne Williamson seminars. And she just like painted. Do you ever listen to Marianne Williamson or read her books?
I've heard her a little in little bits.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
She wrote A Return to Love, which really was like my crack open world into spirituality. So it all escalated really quickly because I had 2 years. I was estranged from my dad. I had really just like put up those boundaries in my life not to engage. And then I get a phone call from my uncle that says the whole family has debated whether or not we should tell you. We know you don't want to know
Oh,
anything, but he has stage 4 terminal cancer. And so something when I got that phone call just like collapsed because I had this deep grief. Like, he can't die like this when we're not talking. But because of my, I read a lot about Al Anon, which is a 12-step program that children of alcoholics or partners of alcoholics can go to. Somehow it went from estranged, he's sick, to he's living in China and he flies to LA and moves in with me. And I am suddenly
wow.
his full-time caregiver. And during all of this, for these 2 years, I am navigating my first relationship. I've fallen in love and also taking care of my father. So when the relationship ended and my dad died, the two things that consume me the most no longer were there, which in reality, looking back, was my dark night of the soul because every aspect of my life, like the masking, I could not do. And even though I had so much anger towards my dad and I was taking care of him and he had colon cancer, so there were a lot of side effects that were just messy with his body, all of it.
Yeah.
I was in the newsroom. It was the middle of the night. I was covering the New York City bureau night shift. And I just started writing. I was alone in the newsroom. I just started writing this essay about feeling like I was the last kid left at summer camp. All of my friends had gotten engaged, moved on, started families. And I really just felt so alone because the other thing was for those 4 years of my 20s, my friendships, my community was all within that man. And so when we broke up, I hadn't prospered my own friendships and relationships outside of that. And it was so painful. And so hard that I didn't want to call his female friends to hang out. It felt
Yeah.
way too close to the fire. So I was very alone. I was very isolated. I was very lonely. And I think that was like the entry point to my prologue. And the essay that got published that intros it was really not very different from what I had written at that time. A lot of the essays that were like time capsules from the years that I was working on my memoir, some of it was so raw, I didn't even want to over edit it or touch it because it just felt like that was exactly who I was at the time that I wrote it. And that was really like how it began. But then once I got my book deal, you know, you don't want to just like read a book about like a pissed off daughter of an alcoholic. You know, you have the reflection that comes later is where like the healing is. So if anyone relates to some of the subject matter, I hope that like the healing I found in any way can like show them a path forward, because that anger only eats you alive. And the healing, if you don't get it, the closure from somebody else, like my father never actually like truly acknowledged what a shitty dad he was, but I had to like find my own peace with it just to live a wholesome, good, healthy life and not let anger consume me.
First of all, thank you so much for sharing all of that.
Yeah.
It's so moving, and I can't wait to read the actual book. Um, and it sounds like where you were in life when you started writing was a very, very different place to where you are now, having, the book is about to come out. What role did writing this book play in, like, all of the changes that transpired in your life during that time? Like, was it kind of like looking back on, "Oh, this changed and that changed?" Was it more like the writing was helping you move through it, or was it something else?
You know what it is? It's that as a TV producer, so much of my career was telling other people's stories and
Yeah.
making their narratives come to life. And when you're able to put all of your time and energy and resources on doing that, in one way, it's really nice because it takes the attention off you and you are like consumed and focusing on somebody else. So you don't have to do a lot of introspective dissecting of your own life. But
Yeah.
at the same time, I was in therapy, you know, dealing with so much trauma over the types of stories I was covering. And my therapist said, you know, you have like waves of PTSD because you're covering mass shootings, you're going on the ground where people have lost their lives, you're talking to eyewitnesses. Like sometimes it would be a sibling who was with somebody that had gotten shot. And like, I was just assigned so many of the mass shooting stories and
Wow.
the nightmares that came, you know, just from a tragedy happens. I get on a plane, I go there, I interview people. Sometimes I'm there for a week, sometimes 10 days. The nightmares started. And then also, just everywhere I went, I was just looking for exit doors. I was just like living in this world of back to back to back to back mass shooting stories and being on the ground like that and talking to these people who had witnessed death unexpectedly at a concert really like shifts and skews your perspective of just life in general. And so some of the aspect of what I write about is realizing like what a toll that job took on me, like mental health wise,
Yeah.
and also recognizing it wasn't sustainable to live that forever. But then I look at people that have careers in war zones. Like some people have it in them to
Yeah.
be in these careers for 30 years. And I do not know how they do it. I would love to sit down and just say, what are you doing to take care of your mental health at
Yeah.
the end of this assignment? Like when you come home and you're just sitting there, because I did not know how to separate myself emotionally because it was like the nightmare of it just continued. And that's like the nightmare starting was really eye opening because I
Mm.
was just so consumed in the stories I was producing, and people trusted me. I like looking back, like people really trusted me to allow
Mm.
me to tell their story. Like there was a great honor in that. And then I also reached a point where I was like, oh wow, I have a story. I have a story to tell too.
It's so interesting listening to your experience. I don't I we barely talked before this conversation, so I'm sure I
Yeah.
didn't mention this, but I have a background in television too, a different
Oh.
aspect of it.
Oh, what'd you
So
do?
so I was a video editor and I worked in reality TV for 10 years before
For
becoming a
which
therapist.
shows?
Oh, a ton of shows. For a long time, I worked on MTV's Made, MADE. I don't know if you remember that.
Amazing. Yeah.
And like just a bazillion other shows, but that was the longest running gig. Um, and I felt like, I mean, it was an extremely stressful environment, but it was like a way to similarly in some ways, like engage with stories and be telling other people's stories. Like it was a way to use my voice during a time in my life when I wasn't quite ready to
Mhm.
open my own self up. But it was like a way to kind of like move through that period of life I felt engaged
Yeah.
in story and creativity. And I felt like once I got to a place in my life where I felt safe enough, I guess, to start cracking open into my own inner world, that
Yeah.
that stressful television environment started to feel intolerable, whereas previously it had felt stressful, but I was doing it for 10 years. Um, and
What do you think
yeah.
it is about the 10 years? Because that was really I moved to New York City at
20.
17, and 27 was when I was like, that they call it the 10,000 hours, right? Like the 10 years, that was when I couldn't do it anymore either. But I went on for
That's
another
wild.
4 after that. But
Yeah.
so you just walked away at the end? You just transitioned
Um,
out?
it was more gradual than just walking away. It started with taking a life coaching certification and then going back to grad school to become a therapist, but it was, it was like a little dipping the toe in the water bit by bit to see, like, is it actually safe to leave this path and go into a new one, which feels very unknown at first.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Um, and one of the things I'm most fascinated with is this idea of, like, you were telling other people's stories for so long. That was a comfort zone, I would imagine, because you were very used to it.
I had a rhythm, they would do the newsroom meeting, they would decide which stories they were going to put a team on. I
Yeah,
was a booking producer. I would get assigned where I was going, what I was doing. I would be booked a flight. I would go get on that plane,
yeah,
boots on the ground, get to my assignment, door knock. If I got a yes, I would call, and sometimes they would send one of the anchors or the correspondents, being on emails with some of the most famous people in the industry.
yeah,
And we would do the interview, and then I would leave and go home and go to the next. It was just,
yeah,
there were parts about it that were also like, what other job would I have done during that time that I would travel to this extent? There was like a real satisfaction of being so needed, getting that call, like, we need you to go here. This is
yeah,
happening. And I'm like, oh, I loved just some of the logistics, like a car is booked, the plane is booked, get on the plane, go. Like I felt like I was in a movie. Like there was a part of it that was so cinematic. And especially when, to be totally honest, like when I was doing the Me Too stories about Harvey Weinstein, it was like a national giant story. And here I am working with some of the victims that are in these news stories that are sitting down with 2020. And I'm texting with these girls, these women. I'm texting with these women, and we're talking about, their fears, their anxiety. Like, I'm like, wow, the bravery. They've held these stories for all of these years, and now I'm going to be sitting in the room while they're telling them for the first time, like knowing there's like an eager, voracious public that wants all of the nitty gritty details. And it'll be my job to sit with them and say, like, do you need a break? Do you want some water? How are you feeling? Not just like, let's roll, go, like I always was trying to think of like the human aspect and like approach it with that, and not just like, producer, we got to get going, we're on deadline, get the story, get it in the can, book their car, send them home. That stuff was the status quo. And I think it takes a really special producer to treat victims like humans, and not just like, what soundbite am I going to get that's usable for a promo. And that's something I thought about a lot.
And I can only imagine like what a huge difference that made to those people that you interviewed. And what I'm hearing in that is that doing that work, there was a lot of like intimacy and presence and like connection and excitement and the unknown and all of that, but it was all kind of wrapped in this circumscribed routine of being fed like, this is the story you're going to cover. Like there are a lot of knowns to it, like this is how things go. And then when you're writing your own story, that's completely different. No one is assigning you this story. No one is like telling you what has to come next. I'm curious how like the process of telling your own story felt different. Like, was that uncomfortable? Was it scary? Was it liberating? Was it something else? And then also like the process of sharing your own story. That's very different from sharing someone else's story.
Yeah. So I, in 2021, joined a writing group solely on memoir writing. The library in my town was doing this class, and I was in that for, I got my book deal last year, 2025. So for 4 years, I had this built-in system of, I was a very active member of this writers group, and our instructor would give us a prompt and we'd have 1 week to work on it and get to workshop the idea. And writing, when you want to do it professionally, really is a practice. And having the structure of my writers group and that time to sit down and work on the pieces made it that, like, by the time I actually got my book deal, I had a Google Drive with, at least 50 essays. And some were like cheeky and fun and comedic and like silly, because sometimes he would give us just a color, like blue. That was it, and so it's not like every essay in there was worthwhile to end up in the final book, but it really helped me start to puzzle piece. Oh, that one was like really, like, one of my favorites is, it's called Hurricane Woman, and it starts out with a man telling me, just be easy breezy, like calm down. And I deadpan back to him, but I'm windy and complicated.
Oh, I
love
that. That's so
I write, it just came to me, and I just write like, some women are easy breezy. I meet those women, I'm like, that woman is chill. And then there's this like conception that was this perception with spirituality that, like, if you're super spiritual, you're just easy breezy. But in reality, like, I have like an inner Larry David monologue in my head, self-deprecating, dissecting things all the time. And that's like my windy and complicated side. And so in the writing, it really was figuring out how to take the essays that existed, but then also I had not carved the time in the same way once my first child was born, who was born in 2023. So there was a lot of like very fresh material. I was super pregnant. I got my book deal when I was 7 months pregnant, and the final manuscript was due 2 weeks before my due date. But as crazy as that sounds, it actually was the biggest blessing, because every process of even sending out my proposal, I felt this urgent need because I knew that I was going to go into this like newborn bubble that was minimum 6 months to a year. And I thought, like, I don't want to wait another 18 months to try to get this book completed. So when I was 7 months pregnant, I was like, I can just do what I need to do while my firstborn will nap. Right now, he
Yeah.
naps. That time is going to disappear in 2 months because when he naps, I'll have a newborn. And so when I had the final deadline, I had this 8-week span where I just took everything that existed. And at that point, I was just getting to, it's in sections, it's in 7 sections. It also goes geographically. I was really able to like lay it out in a way that felt really good for each season of my life and how I wanted it to transition into the next. And
Yeah.
you want to keep the reader engaged. Like you don't want to just like write in a way that, you know, you're rambling through all this trauma. So I do incorporate a lot of my own reflections and journaling ideas at the end of certain chapters. And I hope that that is like the part where people, if they're in the shadows, they can read an idea or a prompt in the journaling exercises, and that will be what helps them seek the light to get out of the
Yeah.
darkness that I write about if they have anything similar.
That's such a beautiful, beautiful metaphor. I'm thinking about what you said about where you were in life when you first started writing these essays. And you said that you were feeling very alone at that
Mm-hmm.
time. And that was kind of the reason to go into writing. And writing can be a very like cocoon like process. Even though you had this writers group that you were part of, like it still can be this very internal process. Um, and now at the time that we're recording this, the book is about to be published and like, you know, go way far beyond the cocoon and be out in the world having a life of its own. What is that emotional experience like for you, anticipating that? And I'm sure, you know, it's already started to travel out into the world and be seen by other people. I'm curious how that feels to you.
It's so, first of all, it does feel very liberating. I didn't even to be it's like this there's only one thing that's like on my head, like I just that's the truth of it. And I didn't even write about it in the book because it felt so incredibly raw at the time. But in my writers group, there was this phenomenal writer. She was a single mother by choice, had had her baby in her 40s, and wrote the most beautiful essays about that decision. And she was one of the best writers like I've ever read in my whole entire life. And when I was in the hospital delivering my firstborn, she got in a plane accident and her child passed away with some family members. And the grief of like knowing that somebody like her was one of the greatest writers and she had such a juicy, beautiful memoir living in her. And I get so angry that her pages have never like it's not my place to do it. It's not
Right.
anyone in the class's place, but I'm like someone in her family should take like I don't even know if they ever got to read them, but like those
Mm.
essays she sent each week for the course of all of those years are a memoir. And so like thinking of somebody like her that never got the chance to do it and then just having a part of me that's like you're alive, you're well, thank God. Like these horrible tragedies are so beyond our control. Like it just felt like I had to release my story and do it because
Mm.
somebody like her couldn't, even
Yeah.
though she had had such a beautiful memoir living in her. And so I mostly just feel like grateful to have like the health to
Yeah.
do that. You know, it takes a lot of like mental energy and time and resources to start and finish a project. And I I mostly just feel like, yes, liberated and grateful. And some of the people that I write about, like my dad, you know, he's passed away.
Yeah.
So I spoke to a woman the other day that has like a beautiful story, but her family member that she wants to write about is still alive. And so I think it's a lot more challenging for her to process the idea of like publishing her book because that person's
Yeah.
still very much here. And I do think when someone's no longer here, you have less of that shadow being like, oh, like it's another thing I'm going to have to talk to them about, So
Yeah.
the timing is everything. And for me, like the timing was exactly right. And it felt very divine. And, like my son next month will be 9 months and then the book comes out 9 months
Wow.
later. Like all of it is just
Wow.
like it's like
Wow.
just, you can't even make this stuff up.
Was there any fear going into like letting the book be out, like letting the mask down publicly, or did it just feel like that had worked itself out through the timing and through the process of everything you just described?
I would have felt so much fear if I was using the real names, but all of the names and like true identifying characters like that somebody could pinpoint like are mostly shifted in a way that's like just obsolete enough that you
Yeah.
wouldn't quite be able to figure it out. And so, some of my ex-boyfriends that I write about, like all of their names are changed. Like it would be such a different thing if it was being released with the real identities attached to it, because then I know that there would be like a lot of opinions and feelings about it. But
Yeah.
I fiercely believe that your lived experiences are your own. And if somebody else has a different recollection or opinion on how it should be displayed, then they can write a memoir. They have the free world to go do that as well. But,
I feel like you just gave
I
permission to like every writer who is listening to this conversation.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. But, like I was recording my audiobook and this like amazing audio assistant was crying in the session because she was going through a breakup and she was like, everything you're writing about your breakup is like exactly what I needed to read. I really write about like identifying like the person that you're seeking when you want to become a mother. Like the person that you're meant to be with, to partner and raise children with, is not flaky. That person does not leave you on red. That person is not hard to pin down. And if they are, those are signals and clues of what they'll be like when you have a family, right? So just helping people get like crystal clear about looking, especially single women, like at a man for who they are, not the potential. Like these things are really important. And now I have like a whole other layer of understanding because thank God, like through my sobriety and my partner's sobriety, he was already sober when we met. Like both of those together made it so that I didn't have to wade through a lot of the bullshit that like my mom did and my dad went through with his disease of alcoholism, because thank God we're both sober. So that's a whole other aspect of my life I've gotten to transcend. God willing, you always hope sober people stay sober, but my children are having a vastly different upbringing and experience than I ever had. Like they will never see either one of us drunk in their whole entire childhood. And I saw my dad drunk every
Yeah.
weekend of my whole childhood. So it's just a different reality that we're giving. We're giving them and gifting them at the same time.
You're talking about like the impact that your journey is having on your kids, on your family, and even on other people who are already getting to listen to your book, like the audio engineer. I feel like that's a great segue, and we're right at that time where we're going to move into the final three questions that I always love to
Oh,
ask every
I love
guest.
it.
And the first of those is, if there is like a soapbox message, whatever that means to you,
I
that
love that
is
question.
imbued in your writing and like the reason that you're putting this book out there, what would that message be?
Okay. I would say the shadow is not your enemy. We live in a culture that is obsessed with light and goodness, which is valuable in its own way. But when you're on that journey and you're spiritually seeking, it is very challenging if you go into groups of people that only want to just exist in the light and all things that are good and feel good and holy, because there is not the depth to hold you when you're going through some of the darker periods. And so for me, like, my soapbox message is that the shadow is also where the medicine is that you're seeking. Like, you cannot surrender what you have not identified and acknowledged. So when you stop running from the shadows, like, that is when some of the healing can begin. And then the light just happens organically and naturally, and you learn to seek it. But like, if you don't learn to like also hold the really messy, shadowy bits, you're not really going to be like grounded and prepared in the same way for like when the light hits your life.
I love that so much. It makes me think of, there's a quote, and I'm not going to get it exactly right because I don't remember, but there's a quote by Rumi, and it's something like, the wound is where the light comes in.
Well, it's also Leonard Cohen says something similar where he said the cracks is where the light gets in also. There's
Yeah.
so many poets and spiritual thinkers that have written about this. And I mention in my book Elizabeth Gilbert, because in Eat, Pray, Love, she just writes, I crossed the street to walk on the sunny side. And like,
Mm.
that's just like a daily practice. You intentionally are like, I'm going to go on the side where the sun is. And the more that you do that, you're just more drawn to that. And then like the shadow parts don't have the same power over you that they used to. And that's what healing is. And that's when you like learned to embrace your self-confidence and your self-esteem, and like everything else that happens after that is really the goodness. And that's what cosmic goodness is about.
Yeah. I feel like there's
Yeah.
an intensity in those shadows that is just simply like potential energy. And
Yeah.
when we meet it with love, it can alchemize.
Yeah. It's the best. I love that.
Mm. I can't wait to read your book. And um, if there's someone who's listening to this conversation and they're feeling inspired by your story, they're feeling inspired by the permission that you gave to anybody to own their own story, to share their own story in their way, but maybe that person is also feeling hesitation, fear, overwhelm, like, is it even worth it to begin? Where do I begin? What words of encouragement would you offer that person?
I would really say like start smaller than like your big picture is, because when I was really wanting to write more and I had a little baby and felt like every time I put this child down, he cries, I can't write ever, but I really want to write. I realized that I could drive in the car and go park somewhere and write on my iPhone notes. And so
Yes.
that wasn't necessarily like what I envisioned. And then even past that, later, I started talking while I was driving, and I would just transcribe the voice memo and then go back and be like, oh, what was my thought here? And then I would elaborate on it. But I think especially like any woman that's listening who might have a full-time job or a child, like, even if you're talking in your cell phone on the walk to go get lunch in New York City and it's 10 minutes where someone thinks you're on a phone call, but you're voice memoing, transcribing later an idea you have about an essay or a feeling you want to excavate deeper, like, use the time you do have, because all of that will add up to a giant Google Drive full of lots of essays that later you can put together and you have a book. Like, it's not as daunting as you would think, honestly.
And it doesn't have to be as rigid as you would think. I love that you said
No.
that, because I feel like it just snaps us out of this thing that can happen to so many of us where we don't even realize we're placing these rigid rules on ourselves. Like, well, I can only write if I'm sitting at a desk and like,
Yeah.
using pen and paper or using a keyboard, whatever it is that we each have in mind of what a writer should do. And I love that you
Yeah.
just kind of exploded that for everyone.
And I wrote a lot in the newsroom, like when it was miraculously quiet and there wasn't breaking news and people
Yeah.
were working on I don't know what. Sometimes I was just like writing, and I knew in my head, I was like, I'm just going to be in a book someday. I didn't know when or where, but I did have like this inner trust and faith in knowing that it would get published at some point. I just, sometimes you do need to write in that leap before you actually like know it will end up somewhere, because you just trust yourself and that you have a story worth telling, because you do. Everyone has something that's meant for a deeper reflection.
And everyone does have that capacity to trust themselves. Like you said, I love this. Ties back to the name of the podcast.
Yeah.
Finally, where can folks find you? Most importantly, where can they find your book? I'm sure it's on all the places. Again, when this episode comes out, it will already be published. And then where can they like connect with your ongoing journey and keep following along?
Everything for the book is just at cosmicgoodness.com. And I personally am the most active on Instagram because I love posting vlogs and reels. And right now I'm really focused on what is it like the life of a writer that's a first-time debut author. And I love posting tips and ideas and like what I'm, yesterday I got to post my first time unboxing the book. But yeah, Instagram is just at Cassidy Gard, Gard, no U. And that's the place I'm the most active, getting to talk with readers. But also, it's been very cool to see how random TikToks go off and like what lands. So I do love TikTok. But yeah, those are the places I would say I'm the most active. And if you do pre-order the book or buy it once it's out, please review it on Amazon or Goodreads. And those are both really helpful places for debut authors to build their reviews. It's very helpful for books and bookstores and libraries.
And it makes a big, big difference. I think, so often we'll think, oh, what difference will it make if one more person writes a review? But it actually makes a huge difference. And
it's helpful.
It's easy to do.
Really helpful. And I do them for other authors because I know how helpful it is. So it's an honor to get to like now invest time in things that I know matter to authors in a really big way.
Well, Cassidy, and I'll put your links, of course, in the show notes.
Thank you.
It's been such a pleasure to meet you. And like, I can't wait to read your writing, partly because just meeting you for the first time, you just have a way of connecting so instantly and being so present and open. It's such a delight to have this chat with you.
That's the best compliment you could ever give a writer or a producer. Thank you. I feel the same. You're very easy to talk to. And that's just like on a human level, such a valuable, like wonderful way to like connect with other people. So thank you for having me. It means so much, truly.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. If you enjoyed today's episode, please do me a favor. Hit that follow button so you don't miss a thing and leave a rating or review. It helps more people find this show, and honestly, it makes my day. And if you're looking for more ways to trust yourself and start listening to that gut instinct of yours, come hang out with me on Instagram at Anna_Holtzman. Let's keep the conversation going. Thanks so much for listening, and until next time, trust yourself. You've got this.